In 1997, when the original Final Fantasy VII was released on the PlayStation 1 in the UK, I was 8 years old. And I remember having to wait for my dad to finish playing it before I was allowed to touch it. I got to watch some parts of his playthrough, but the wait to play it myself was agonising. When I finally did get my hands on it though, it was well worth the wait, and it was a formative experience for me. Even though Final Fantasy VII isn't my favourite in the series, it is one of the best games I've ever played, even now in my mid-30s. And when Square Enix showed what a remake of its most iconic title could look like on the PS3 as part of a tech demo, my imagination went wild. When that tech demo became a reality with 2020's Final Fantasy VII Remake, I loved it, despite its somewhat divisive take on what a remake was, and when the second part of the trilogy called Rebirth came out in February 2024, I knew that I had to earn its Platinum Trophy. But boy oh boy, I did not expect it to be such a long journey to get it. So let's have a look at what Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has in store for a trophy hunter. As is to be expected from a large-budget PlayStation 5 exclusive title, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is gorgeous. The character models, which were already impressive in the PS4's remake, have all been improved upon, and the world itself is beautiful and full of details as you run through them. The areas you travel to are diverse and full of unique and interesting landmarks and ecologies, and none of them felt boring or bland to look at. I played almost exclusively in performance mode as I played through the game, but even sacrificing some of the game's visual quality to hit a consistent 60 frames per second, the game was still able to stop me in my tracks to look at some beautiful vista or detail for a moment. There were, unfortunately, some moments where some of the details looked a little bit fuzzy, especially around character models, and I did notice some missing textures or pop-ins, especially towards the late half of the game. But, for the most part, Rebirth looks amazing and keeps up the Final Fantasy series trend for pushing graphical quality higher and higher. Perhaps even more impressive than the visual quality of the game is the audio that accompanies Cloud and his crew around. I love the soundtrack to this game so much. There are some incredible rearrangements of classics like Ahead on Our Way and the Cosmo Canyon theme, but there are also so many amazing new tracks to go along with them, like Stamp's theme, which plays during a couple of side quests. Each of the regions that you travel to has its own main theme, as does each dungeon, and each track has a main travel version that you hear as you run around, and then a more punchy combat version that flawlessly weaves in when the combat starts. It's astounding just how many different tracks there are, and I'm sure that I heard at least 3 or 4 different battle themes in the Grasslands area alone. A good soundtrack is something that I consider crucial to a good video game, and Square Enix almost always knocks it out of the park with these, and I can't wait to listen to the soundtrack as much as I listen to the original or remakes. When Final Fantasy VII Remake came out in 2020, I was really impressed by the boldness the team took in the way that they chose to remake the original. Not only graphically, but in gameplay and narrative too, adding wholly new elements to keep players on their toes. Now, in 2024, I am stunned by the brave decision to remake Final Fantasy VII as a WarioWare or Mario Party game, or at least a Yakuza-inspired one. The amount of side content is astounding, if I'm honest, and not just in the way of side quests or combat challenges the way that Remake had, but in sheer minigame volume. All of the classic minigames from the original are still here: Chocobo Racing, G-Bike, the 3D Brawler, all improved to an insane degree, with Chocobo Racing being a brilliant Mario Kart inspired affair. But on top of that, there are a bonanza of new additions of varying quality and fun. There's a football minigame where you play as Red 13 against other random animals. There is a game where you beat up cactuars with Yuffie or Aerith. There's a carnival shooting game. There is a Fall Guys inspired minigame where you're a frog trying to stay on a platform. There's even a minigame for picking mushrooms. There's Queen's Blood, which is the coolest side content card game since The Witcher's Gwent, and I swear, Square Enix, you need to make an app version of Queen's Blood. You will make so much money. One of the strangest decisions that the game makes, though, is to make many of these minigames not optional. Square Enix seems so proud of their insane collection of diversions that the story often stops to ask you to do something weird and wacky, like ride a dolphin through a racecourse or sneak up on an unsuspecting chocobo to progress through the main scenario. All of this still feels right, however, though, as the original game had these moments too, and I think it's a huge part of why it's considered such a classic. All of this insane side content is before we even get to the more traditional side quests that open world games tend to have. Each region that you travel to has world intel that you must collect for lovable robot boy Chadley, and these include climbing and activating towers, in 2024 I know, scanning crystallized lifestream shards, and completing combat encounters with specific goals, like staggering an enemy or killing it before it uses a certain attack. When you are doing a completionist playthrough, all of these add up to a staggering amount of things to do, so much so that the main quest can often feel like the side content that you do in between clearing up the map. This isn't to say that the main scenario is bad at all, or lesser in any way. It's actually the opposite, the main story is brilliant, but I want to avoid spoilers in this video, so I'll not go into too much detail on it. What I will say though, is seeing so many moments from the original but with the graphical power of modern tech never fails to amaze me. The story being told follows the same pattern as Remake did, with the bones of the story being mostly the same as the original, but everything is more fleshed out. Every one of the main party is more realised and more personable, and a huge part of that is the way that the actors portray the characters. This makes the events that they go through hit even harder this time around, as the game makes everyone so damn likeable. I didn't really care too much about Aerith in the original game, and I didn't like Yuffie at all, but in Rebirth I love them both. In fact, Yuffie is one of my favourite characters now, partly because she kicks all kinds of ass in combat, but mostly because she is so well written and acted in Rebirth. In fact, she's a huge part of one of the things I really loved about this game, how funny it is, and how earnest the characters are. Rebirth is almost constantly throwing something ridiculous at you, just the same as the original did, to the point where it seems to be able to laugh at itself just as much as it laughs at the characters. Not many games manage to pull off varying so wildly between emotional themes of trauma and losing yourself to, hey, now we're going to go race chocobos, without losing the narrative thread completely, but Final Fantasy VII managed it so well, and Rebirth perfects this. The game is full of so many little extra elements of character building, and one of the game's greatest ideas was not separating the party when you travel very often. Even if, when you're playing, you only control 3 of them in battle, your other companions are always close, so there's usually some background chatter as you go, and it makes the whole group feel a lot closer than was possible to portray before. Other parts of the story and world have been expanded in the same way too. Areas like the Mithril Mines, which was a dungeon made of maybe 4 screens in the original, is now a whole explorable dungeon that takes like an hour to get through. Gungaga isn't just a town and a reactor, it's a whole ass jungle now. The lifestream crystals you scan for Chadley give lore about the world and its history, and each region has shrines to summons that as you explore you will sometimes get bits of myth about the summons that were worshipped in the area. It's little additions like this that I think really highlight why I enjoyed the time I spent with the game so much. It's everything that I loved about the original Final Fantasy VII and Remake Part 1, it's just, there's more of it.
Alexander. Long ago, a great but wicked nation prospered in Corel. Legend tells that it was wiped out overnight by a giant mechanical construct. A construct called Alexander.
This goes for combat too, which obviously makes up a large part of the game. The main system of combat returns from Remake. You hit things with quicker, weaker attacks to build up ATB, and then you spend that ATB to unleash more powerful attacks or magic. But now there is more focus on party tactics. Each party member can unlock synergy skills and abilities. Synergy skills are no-cost abilities that you can access while blocking, and have a range of effects like performing a counter with one of your party members, or guarding 2 characters at once from damage, or charging up a big powerful true charge slash from Cloud. On my initial playthrough on normal difficulty, these seemed less useful to me and I very rarely used them. But in hard mode, these are incredibly useful, especially in some of the harder fights, and one fight in particular, I died on it like 9 or 10 times before I realised I had a synergy skill that made one of the attacks so much easier to deal with. The other new addition is the synergy abilities, which I used all the time on both playthroughs. Once you have used enough ATB with the two characters that are synergized, you can unleash a synergy attack, which does a ton of damage and mostly looks really cool, especially the Barrett and Aerith ones. But these also tend to have a powerful secondary effect, like raising your limit break level, which allows you to use a stronger version of your limit breaks, or granting you a small window where spells will cost 0 MP to use, which is incredibly useful in certain fights. Learning how to use these skills and abilities, as well as creating a good build with the material you can obtain, is crucial, as in general, Rebirth is a fair bit harder than Remake was, even on its standard difficulty. The combat challenges that you have to do if you're going for the Platinum Trophy are incredibly difficult, and some of them took me 3 or 4 evenings of attempts before I was able to beat them. Despite the difficulty though, combat is fun and engaging, and it can be incredibly tactical on the harder difficulties, not only with what skills you use in battle, but with what material you come equipped with, and what party you use to make the best use of their synergies. And this leads me to my only real gripe with the game, and that's its trophy list. There's too much. The game took me nearly 150 hours just to finish my first playthrough. That was being as completionist as possible, sure, getting every trophy except for the one for finishing the game on hard. To get these trophies, you need to do every single Chadley World Intel event, of which there are over 150. You have to do every single side quest, find every materia, find and master every weapon ability, and defeat the game's admittedly very cool super boss. And this isn't even the longest part. There's a trophy called 7-Star Hotel, which requires you get the top score on every minigame on its normal and hard difficulties, including ones that are story related like the Dune and Parade. It also asks you to do all of Chadley's VR combats, including the brutal and legendary difficult ones. There are 88 different things you will need to do for this trophy, and it really does mean doing almost everything that the game has to offer. This trophy thankfully does encompass most of the other trophies of the game, so as you're working on it you will be slowly unlocking them as you go, but man, at the end it did start to feel like a slog. And then once you finished all of that, you have to play through the game on hard, which even having finished everything else is still pretty challenging. It does kind of feel like a boss rush though, because you can keep your fast travel unlocks, so you can skip cutscenes and zip around the map quite quickly. One thing I do have to say, and obviously this will vary from person to person, you might be a lot better at games than I am, but Final Fantasy VII Rebirth might be one of the hardest platinums I've ever earned. The last few VR challenges for Chadley were crazy hard, and sometimes felt unfair with how quickly you can get destroyed if you're not careful, or learn how to do those perfect parries and dodges. Thankfully, there are a ton of videos out there that are super helpful with tips on how to get through these, but even having the right build, you still need to execute the strategy well, or you might find yourself on round 9 out of 10, 30 minutes into the challenge, and find yourself dying to an unlucky combo, and then you have to start again. The hard mode run itself is also really tough. You're not able to use items, and you can't regenerate MP apart from at the end of chapters. It makes a lot of the bosses incredibly tough, especially when you know it's the first boss in a string of 3 or 4 in the same chapter, so you have to really conserve the spells that you use. Unlike the VR challenges though, the difficulty in hard mode always felt fair. Learning the boss's moves, getting the right build together, and practicing this all at once felt rewarding when you finally finished it. Once you've done everything though, you will earn the Platinum Trophy, the Planet's Hope. And congratulations if you did it, because this was a toughie. It took me 174 hours in total by the end of my run, but it was a damn good 174 hours. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is probably going to live in my head for a while, as I wait for the conclusion to the Remake trilogy. And even with some of the trophy frustration I felt while playing it, I don't think I've ever been more excited for a game to come out. Rebirth is a game that literally tries to do it all, and it almost succeeds, despite sometimes feeling a little bit bloated with the amount of side content there is. Despite this though, I would rather they carried on this trend in whatever Final Fantasy VII Re-3rd game ends up being called, than having to scale back the game and losing out on so much of the heart that Rebirth has. I can honestly say, at the end of the day, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is everything I wanted a remake to be, and a whole lot more. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope you found it useful or interesting, and if you did, please consider subscribing. Let me know if you've played Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and what your thoughts on it are, and if you've managed to earn the Platinum Trophy. If you want, check out pressxgaming.com for written reviews, and until next time, happy hunting.